I gotta give my consent.
Hi, everybody. This is Angela here with Susan Ruth. I'm so excited to have you on my channel over here.
Thank you for having me.
You're such a polymath. You're so capable. You work in so many fields. So to start, could you just tell us about yourself? Like, what do you do?
I am let's see, what are my things? I have an award-winning podcast called Hey Human Podcast. I am an abstract painter, which I just took it up one day and turned out I was good at it, and people started enjoying my work. And I am a songwriter. I put out four of my own records as a puppy and then moved to Nashville and started writing for other people. Had songs on Reba McEntire and Lone Star and some European bands like the United and Americana stuff. It's just various genres of music. I still write music, and I'm trying to think of all the things I do. I am a poet. I write poetry, and I recently wrote and directed my first short film, and it's called The First. That's very exciting. So that's hitting the festivals. I've been submitting like crazy for that.
Wow, that's amazing. You do all that and successfully in so many arenas.
Yeah, I
Excellent.
would say that if it depends on what your idea of success is. If it's a big mansion, then that's not me. But if it's being able to be creative in lots of different areas and be a storyteller in a lot of different areas and love my work, then I'm truly successful. Yes, because I do love it.
Exactly. I saw on your website that your fourth independent studio album is entitled All I Ever Wanted Was Everything. And I was
Yeah,
like, that is the most polymath title ever.
it's true. Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's funny. People used to ask me, "Why do you do so many things?" And I used to respond, "Oh, I guess I get bored easily." And instead of that, about maybe a decade ago, I started responding with, "I get interested easily. I get curious easily." It's funny how we put a negative connotation, boredom. I do think boredom facilitates invention, and unfortunately, we live in a society that lacks boredom in a lot of ways. And so there's not necessarily that desire to reach for stars and see pictures in clouds and think about how A fits in B and things like that. But I realized a long time ago that it's much more accurate to say that I'm curious about things, I'm interested in things, not I get bored easy.
Oh, I love that reframing. That is so good for any polymaths watching. This is a good example. Instead of saying I get bored easy, say I get curious easily, because it's really true, isn't it?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So one of the things that struck me as I was like doing a little bit of research on what you do is you have this confidence. At least it's that way. Like your stage presence, the emotional vulnerability you express through your art, like there's just this kind of bravery you have to be real.
There's that old saying that being brave isn't an absence of fear. It's about being afraid and doing it anyway. I would say I'm in the latter category
Mm.
because it has been a journey of I used to have terrible stage fright, for example, and that lived with me all the way up into adulthood that no matter how many shows I would perform in, I would still get super nervous ahead of time. I would relax into it 3 or 4 songs in, but oof, it would be very nerve-wracking. And then one day, a friend of mine, a woman named Kathy McHugh, said to me, "What other people think about you isn't any of your business." She's a little more salty in the way she said it, but she said, "It's none of your business what other people think about you." And that clicked something in my mind that released me. And I think fear is a valuable tool. It eggs us on. If it's debilitating, we get into trouble. But that idea that I can be whomever I am, and if somebody else doesn't like it, that's on them. I don't need to take that on. And that has reframed my ability to be in front of people and perform. And also, just as a creative throughout my life, because I make things that other people take in and absorb, that a long time ago I realized that once I have been the conduit and released those things that I create out into the world, they will live how they live. They will grow and be whatever they are. That's not my responsibility anymore because I've released it. If that makes sense. I've allowed them to now whatever I've created to go on and live its own life.
Yeah. There's this, I think especially for polymathic people who want to be free to be their authentic selves in original, unconventional ways sometimes. There's this push and pull between I don't want to care too much what people think of me because then I'm going to conform and modify and copy and be like everyone else when I really just want to be myself. So there's that. But then there's this other element of like, but some of what I'm making is to make an impact, to help, to inspire. And so there's this balancing act between like not caring too much, but like wanting to make a difference. And that can be a difficult journey to navigate. Have you felt
I
that?
think it comes from if you're coming from a space of truth, every there is to me an undeniable resonance to truth. So if what you're creating is truthful for you, at least one person out there is going to feel that resonance. At least one, and one can be a lot, as my friend Dave Berg used to say. One person is all it takes to change an entire planet. Because when you've got that one person, they fundamentally change. And I don't know. I don't know that it's healthy for us to listen to our fear to the extent of, oh, I have to make this thing and it has to be great. And if it's not great, I'm a failure. That doesn't really serve us. I have never been a conventional person to honestly to my chagrin as a kid. I never understood other kids. I didn't They seemed weird and why is everybody's trying to be the same and I was never good at that. I liked adults because they were all varied and interesting and that's a lonely place to be and I'd be lying if it isn't sometimes a lonely place to be as an adult because it's hard for people to really wrap their head who aren't in that realm to wrap their head around the type of person who's zigging and then is done with zigging and now feels like zagging and then feels like zigging again or maybe zunking or zonking or it's I have done corporate America, for example. I think it works for a lot of people, but it is withering to me.
Hmm.
It is the worst thing to do to me. I sometimes think, "Oh, what a much easier life it would be if I could be that person," but I'm not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love your authenticity, your realness, the truthfulness that you exude. Truth is,
Oh,
by the way, truth matters very much to me too. That's why I have the word tattooed on my arm right here.
yes. It's important, and I think we live our lives in denial of that truth a lot of times. And that process of finding a space to love ourselves is really to understand the truth of ourselves.
Mhm.
It's
Yeah.
the bottom line. That you're worthy, I'm worthy. What you do is important, what I do is important. Even if nobody ever sees it, it's still important. Does it pay the bills? Not always, but it's still important.
Yeah. You shared I'm going to share with anyone watching, like you shared a video with me earlier today. Um, would you like to summarize it? Maybe I'll let you do it, or we can do it together.
Well, it's an Oscar Wilde quote, and Stephen Fry is giving a talk. He's being interviewed, and he references this quote about the idea that if you are born and you decide you're a baker or a banker or a farmer or this, whatever the one thing is that you are, then that becomes your prison. But if you go through your life and you never know who you are, that's where the magic happens. And you never really figure out who you are or why you're here. It enables you to take in the entirety of the universe and be the entirety of the universe. It just that quote, which I'm completely murdering because it's is so lovely to me. Because I do think there is this atmosphere around people that don't quite know how they fit into any one thing because they fit into so many things. Again, I spoke of loneliness. I think there is that sense about a lot of people like me.
Yeah.
You would know better than I because you've interviewed so many people and know so many personally. You would probably speak better to that, but that's how I feel.
Yeah, for a lot of people, having like one thing does feel, I call it the cage of specialization. And that's what's so, it's, you know, so many people go along with that, even as it doesn't feel right to them too,
Mm.
because everyone else does it. And then secretly they're unhappy, they're not enjoying their lives. So I just, I think it's so amazing when someone has the courage to just follow what feels right to them, even if everyone else isn't doing that. You know, have you ever gotten like a people in disbelief or like any of that, like when you tell them all the stuff you do, what kind of and I know we don't want to care too much, right? We don't want to, I'm just curious though, what kinds of comments people make when they find out all the cool stuff you do.
It depends on which part of my life you're talking about, or even where I am. Here in Los Angeles, people just go, "Oh yeah, makes sense. That's really cool." They're sort of used to the hyphenate. When I lived in Nashville, I got a lot of, "You should just do the one thing, songwriting, and do that really, really well and let all this other stuff go because you can't concentrate and excel unless you just do the one thing." And I often said, "Yeah, but what if I can excel at lots of different things?"
Mm-hmm.
And also, what does success even mean? And again, I think back to, is it the mansion? I know a lot of, I know a couple billionaires who are miserable. I know a lot of very wealthy people who are not super happy. That doesn't equate happiness. If you're doing the things that bring you joy, that interest you, that keep your mind stimulated, that allow you to have a freedom of thought and feeling, I think you're infin- infinitely more wealthy in that regard. Do I eat mac and cheese sometimes? Absolutely. I do love mac and cheese, so that helps. Uh, I think you have to also be willing, and some people aren't. Some people are on the path and then they're like, this is too hard, because it is. It is not, does not necessarily equate financial freedom. It's a roller coaster. And so, at least in my experience, and that's a strappy ride. You have to be prepared for that. And as you said, people who's like, "Well, that's weird that you do so many different things," or "You should just pick the one." Again, that sounds like misery to me. At the same time, I am jealous of people that can do it. I have a jealousy of that because it sounds easier. It sounds a lot easier.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, I love that you have your own definition of success. I think this is something everybody should do. Everybody should just define success. For me, the greatest form of success is giving and receiving love.
Mm.
Like the people who don't have love in their life have the worst kind of poverty, in my view. And being able to spend your life doing things you care about, you're passionate about, that bring you meaning, that is like actual success. So many people have been brainwashed, in my view, that success can be found in a bank account or a building you have in your name that will
Or an
actually,
award or all sorts of things.
yeah,
Yeah.
all sorts of things. And I think it's really important that we all define what success like if I were at the end of my life looking back, what would I want to be able to say that I did or experienced or contributed, and let that be my version of success. And it won't be, I mean, we've all heard the quotes, like, it won't be on my deathbed, oh, I wish I would have worked more hours in the office.
Yeah.
Like that isn't a good measure of success. So,
When I was young, I thought, oh, I want a Grammy for sure. I want a Grammy. And even as a screenwriter now, it's like, oh, an Oscar would be fun. But here's the thing about people's attention span. It's quite short. So I've won some pretty decent awards in my lifetime as a creative, and nobody probably remembers any of that. all these years later or all these minutes later, because mostly people are just trying to function in their own lives. And whether or not I have something sitting on a shelf or hanging on a wall doesn't really move the needle. It doesn't make me a better person. It doesn't make me better at what I do. I am what I am. I do what I do regardless. There are people out there that are extraordinarily talented that no one will ever know their name. Does that make them less talented? My God, no. Absolutely not. And so it's sort of these popularity contests and don't really ultimately matter that much in my mind. Again, would it be nice? Sure, that's sweet. Thank you for acknowledging me. I'm sure I'd get caught up in the moment like anybody else. But then a week, a month, a year, 2 years go by. I'm not walking around going, "Hey, I won a Grammy. Hey, I won an Oscar." That would be weird.
Yeah. Can I pick your opinion as it relates to defining success?
Sure.
'Cause I think a lot of people are like, well, success is being happy. And I think that's a decent definition, but I also know that like meaning and contribution and impact, positive social change, for example, might be hard work that doesn't make you happy. But it also, like, because I am also a criminal justice reform advocate, and it's frustrating as hell to look at that world.
You bet.
And so that work doesn't make me happy. It makes me upset, actually, but that
Mhm.
spurs me to action to do something, which I find very rewarding and meaningful. You know what I mean? So, what are your thoughts on like success and happiness?
I don't think they're mutually inclusive. Again, I know some incredibly successful people that are miserable. If success equated to happiness and if wealth equated to happiness, then there would be a lot of I feel like there would be a lot more justice and equality of wealth distribution because happy people tend to share things and share happiness and all that. Um, I get depressed like everybody else. I can sink into the wake up in a morning and think, oh, why am I doing this again? Almost like it's a sickness or a madness, as Robin Williams said. We all have a spark of madness. We mustn't lose it. The creatives. Um, yeah, I don't know. I do believe that making a difference in the world is important personally, but it's not for everyone. 'Cause it's hard work. It takes its toll emotionally. Uh, and it's not for everyone. And I am a big believer because I've seen it in action in something called the ripple. And that let's say you're standing in line at the grocery store and the person ahead of you is in a terrible mood and they're being evil to the checkout person. And the checkout person is doing everything they can to hold it together. And then the evil, mad person walks away. Not necessarily evil, as in a judgment call, but just having a crap day and sticking it on the checkout person. And then you walk up, you make a joke, you smile, you say, "Your hair looks really pretty," or "I like that shirt on you." That is such a tiny little thing you can do that will completely change the entirety of the universe. Because then what happens? Let's say I'm not in line next and I don't get to, make that person feel good again after they felt bad. So let's just say guy that's grumpy goes out and just spreads his grump like a cancer. And the poor person that has had it inflicted upon them, now their mood is shifted. Let's say they're grumpy with me and to everybody else. That is an exponential ripple, right? But we can change those ripples into something positive by, again, like I go and I say, "Oh, you look good," whatever. So now that person has it's stopped that cycle. Now the next person in line, they're going to smile, they're going to be fine, and it's sort of righted itself again. If that makes sense, I just think the tiniest, tiniest, tiniest thing makes a huge amount of difference. And back to your point a second ago, I do think people like the trolls of the world that deep down there is a there's a resentment obviously, but there's a sadness because they see other people being happy and they don't know how to find that in themselves. And so they criticize the work or the attitude or the look or the transness or the, whatever it is, they lash out at that because they don't know how to feel those feelings,
Hmm.
you know?
Yeah. And just as you can ripple out grumpiness, you can also ripple out kindness or,
And it barely takes anything. It barely takes anything.
yeah, exactly.
And it's so worthwhile
For
in
sure.
my estimation. It's so, so worthwhile.
You know, another ripple I love? I love the ripple of authenticity. Like when you show up and you're just a human being with your flaws, your strengths, and you really let it show,
Hmm.
like you do, I think, through your art and just all your endeavors. I could tell you're a genuine person with a good heart. I feel like it gives permission or maybe even inspires other people to that authenticity. So it's like another kind of ripple, like you giving permission to just let's all just show up as we are, rather than that conformity culture, that like pressure to be like others around you.
Yeah, because what does that serve? If I say I'm in a bad mood today, as long as I'm not taking it out on another person, if I say I'm in a bad mood today, that allows other people around me to be like, you know what, I'm in a bad mood today too. And it makes it okay. We're entitled to all of our spectrum of emotions for sure. My concern is when they're taken out on other people who don't deserve to have that thrust upon them, you know?
Yeah.
Uh, I believe in working with my shadow. I try to talk to it as often as I can,
Mm.
to better know myself and to also, uh, if you ignore it and push it down, I think it's just going to bubble up somewhere else, some other crack in your sidewalk, you know?
Ooh, let's talk about that for a second. Talking to your shadow. I've done similar work, but I'm curious, like, what does that look like for you? Like exploring your shadow side.
It is about when I'm feeling a certain way or an emotion that is maybe in the shadow side, like jealousy or anger or whatever it is, that I ask why? Okay, you're feeling that. That's okay. It's okay to feel it. I'm not going to ignore it. It's there. Why do I feel that? What's causing it? For example, I think I've probably used this on other shows, but I'm just going to bring it up anyway. A long time ago, I was at a show for my friends. They had this big show. It was a great turnout. This is probably a decade ago or something. And I love my friends dearly. And they were performing, and everybody was talking about how great they were and all this stuff. And I felt myself getting jealous. I really felt it. And I was like, what's wrong with me? I love these people. They're my friends. Why am I sitting here getting jealous? And so I sat there for a second and I said, okay, jealousy, what's going on? Why are you feeling jealous? And I could kind of go back to just even a little version of myself where maybe my brother was getting more attention than me, or maybe somebody's accolade, even though I was working so hard, they got the thing. This sort of feeling of, oh, that's not fair, or whatever it is. And once you shine that light on that and acknowledge it, I think it just by nature dissipates because you kind of see it's silly.
Hmm.
It turns it into something else, transmogrifies it.
Hmm. Yeah. It's like being an alchemist with your emotional world. I love that your curiosity extends not only to the world out there, but to the world inside of you. And I've done similar work, parts work, internal family systems work, where like if I have an emotion or a feeling, I I get curious and I kind of have an internal dialogue.
Uh-huh.
Amazing how powerful that can be to sort of help me understand and like release and move past it rather than, oh, let me just ignore that because it's not a convenient emotion. I don't want to feel that. Like actually working through it and feeling it is the way to let it go.
Yeah, and it goes away a lot quicker that way. Because if it
Exactly.
festers, like everything else, it turns into its own kind of cancer, or maybe even literal cancer. My brother used to say when we were young that I was the thorn in the family side, because when there was any kind of unrest, I would say, this is going on. Everyone, look at this thing that's happening. We have to see the thing. And he said it made the rest of the family chaotic and crazy because nobody wants to look at the thing. And I was like, it's right there. Look at the thing. There's the thing.
You know what I love you said earlier, the spectrum of emotions, that like you're willing to experience the spectrum of emotions that happen in your internal world. And to me, that's kind of polymathic in nature. It's a willingness to accept all that's going on in you and to look at it and to deal with it. And I can't help but wonder if that emotional versatility that you have has enhanced your work as an artist.
I think it can't not do that because it's an understanding of how complicated we are as people.
Mhm.
And at least in writing people, like in a script, for example, in writing people to understand that there is no such thing as a one-sided human being. You can take the worst of us or the best of us, and the worst of us have good sides, believe it or not, and the best of us have terrible sides, believe it or not.
Mhm.
And I think there's a tendency to black and white everything around us because it's easier to think about that way. There's such a nuance to humanity and emotionalness and all the things, and this sort of black and white creation myth doesn't do much except for cause a whole lot of problems. You can't really begin to have empathy for someone and for yourself until you're willing to see all sides of the situation. It's very easy to get I'll use any villain you want. I mean, you can pick a villain, all the things about them you hate. They're the worst. They kick puppies and, take lollipops from babies or worse. And then you have to go, okay, that's terrible. That's horrible. Is there any part of them that's redeemable? And I think I hate to say it. I mean, maybe not in a true psychopath, but I think that there is a part of all of us that's redeemable somewhere in there.
Mhm.
I
Yeah.
don't I don't deal in psychopaths really much. I don't know that I've ever met one, so I can't speak to what that's like. They may be irredeemable and that's like a brain thing, but I think it's scary to look at our dark side and so easy to look at other people's dark side.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so easy to see the light in others and so hard to see our own light at the same
Yeah.
time.
That's
I
so
don't know. I feel like I rambled that whole thing. It made sense in my brain, but I think I might have gone off the train there a little bit. But
No, no, I loved it. One of the things I'd like to, because you're such an artist in so many modalities, and one of the things I'd like to share with you, can I do a little story time real quick? I used
yes,
to live in LA, like you do now. And at my first semester of college, I took this freshman seminar called Self-Expression and the Arts. And the entire purpose of this freshman seminar, the professor who led it made us or encouraged us anyway to try new things. The whole point of this seminar was to go out in the world, try new things, and then come back and report on it. And I took this seriously. I had gone to like a Christian school my whole life and kind of been in a bubble. And here I was in a new city, and this professor's telling me to try new things. And I was like, okay, will do. And that professor, like that one class, it's what inspired my eventual journey to polymathy. And I reconnected with that professor a couple years ago. And in that discussion, he's an artist. He was like a clown and a theater professor, and he made films, and he has a podcast, and he's a photographer, and like he's one of those like LA people that's just in the arts, right? And it was so fascinating to me that he was like, well, polymathy is just being an artist. It's like your life is your art. And I like that has stuck with me. And so I frequently will say that when you live your life in a polymathic way, when you're just all in, you're willing to explore what you're curious about, you're willing to be brave and authentic and original and zig and zag and not conform, that your life itself becomes artistic expression.
hmm
Does that fit for you?
yeah, I would say that's accurate. I
Yeah.
would say that's accurate because how I think when you open up to that, to the possibilities of the everything, that you see it everywhere,
Mm,
you know?
yeah.
And it's a bummer. I'll walk around and I'll see people nose deep in their phones and look, our internet has its place, has done amazing things, but I think it's killed our curiosity in that it placates it immediately. I use it, I think, oh, I want to know about this thing. Great, I can deep dive it. But then I sit and think about it. Like, I think that there is this need to be constantly stimulated. And again, it leads us down a path where we forget that the whole world is incredibly stimulating.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
yeah, living a life where you understand that everything around you is relevant
Yeah.
and that nothing around you is relevant. You have to live in both places at the same time, you know? And I tell you, I mean, as a kid, I barely graduated high school. I hated it, nearly flunked out. I loved college, but and I got into college because I'm quick on my feet. I wrote a letter and I said, "You have to let me in. Trust me on this. You know, test me on anything you want." High school was not for me. Junior high school was not for me. I couldn't stand it.
Yeah.
Did that mean I was an idiot?
No.
No, not at all. Not at all. And our education system isn't really geared, I think it's getting better, but isn't really geared for people that think outside what a traditional modality is. It's getting better, yes, but it's I still think whenever anybody laments to me that their kid's not doing well in school, I'm like, "Oh, they're probably super smart."
Yeah. So many polymaths report that like they love learning, but they hate school because
Yeah.
everything's like slowed down and dumbed down and someone else's agenda. Like there's not enough self-direction in the
Mm.
traditional education. I mean, God, I could critique our educational system.
Yeah, it's terrible. Unfortunately, teachers, you're doing a badass job. I know it's hell on wheels. I don't It's one of the hardest jobs in the world, I'm sure, but it's they are not well equipped by the education system to be able to even deal with anybody that's outside of the norm.
Yeah, the teachers of teachers are amazing people and they have a
Mhm.
hard job and I don't think I could do it. Like I don't think I'd have
I
the
don't think I can do it.
stamina and patience and like all that to do it. But I think it's the design of the system that's
For
failing,
sure.
you know?
For sure. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
But again, I think I had a couple of really wonderful teachers who saw that spark of madness in me and let it do whatever it wanted. Like I was in my young elementary school days when we moved back from England. I was my school was on an orchard, so there are nut orchards everywhere. And most of the kids, you know, you had to play recess and do all that stuff. And I was allowed to go explore and just do whatever. And I would just climb trees. I pretended I was superheroes and I did all sorts of things and I got myself busy and did all that stuff. And my teacher didn't make me be a part of this other thing because I think she recognized that it wouldn't work for me,
Hmm. Hmm.
you know? Now they would not let kids jump around in trees because of the sheer horror of what would happen if you fell out. But I fell out of a couple trees. You just sort of like, oops.
That's how you learn sometimes though, you know?
Yeah, they don't do that anymore. I mean, we live in a dangerous world, you know, and it's predatory in a lot of ways, which sucks because it robs kids of one of the most precious gifts there is, and that's exploration. But there are a lot of people on this planet, so the
Yeah.
bad guys get to be more also, yeah.
And there are other ways to explore, in safe ways too. Like I have a 7-year-old daughter, and like my goal as a mom, other than like giving her unconditional love and making sure she's safe and healthy, um, is really giving her an opportunity to sample things, like a
Mm.
sampling period, when she's young. Like she's been in gymnastics and karate and dance and swim and scouts and engineering club and theater club and my goal is to just expose her and help her figure out what she's really passionate about.
That's so awesome because the parents and look, I don't have kids. What the hell do I know? But the idea that if you don't like this, you know, you're going to keep doing it because that's the way you have to stick with it. It's like that's not first of all, kids' brains are incredible. They are moving so rapidly, they're absorbing everything so quickly that that scenario that you're describing is stellar for our brain. It's so neuroplastic. It's going all over the place. I mean, I lit my room on fire twice as a kid because I was playing science. Yeah, I mean, I was hell on wheels, you know?
That's great. You know, you were exploring, you were learning in your own way. School drove you crazy and you went and you climbed trees and you lit fires.
Yeah.
One of
Well,
the
technically the
the way.
fires happened because I mixed chemicals that
Oh,
exploded. But luckily I
okay.
knew because I was an explorer, I knew to put it out with baking soda.
There you go.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Right now everyone listening is like, this is nuts. I survived. It's okay. I survived. But I don't know. I worry sometimes when I see young people just so nose deep into their phone and I just think, "Oh God, you're missing so much of the world and of yourself," you know?
Yeah,
I sound like an old person, I guess. All old people say this about the next generations, but it concerns me.
yeah, I agree. You know, I think of human beings as being like part physical, bodies, physical animals, whatever you want to call it. We live in a physical world, but we also live in a mental world. And I think what the one of the downsides of the internet is that it put us so much in the mental world. And it kind of has withdrawn us a bit more from the physical world. And the
Well, it's
physical world,
destroyed our emotional world too.
yeah, that too. Like it's made it more unidimensional. I mean, we can learn from the internet. We can learn from other people.
100%.
Although
Yeah.
there's also like a lot of false information that we can run across, and that's part of the difficulty of the modern world is just even figuring out like what's reliable
For
information.
young people, it's harder to be able to dismantle the trolls and the comparable. Yeah, I'm comparing myself to this person or that person and all of that. It's very hard to explain to someone who's young not to take that on.
Yeah.
And when we were kids, school bullies existed, but they didn't live with us 24 hours a day,
Yeah.
7 days a week, 300 days a year, that we could escape them. But
Yeah.
now, because of the internet, there's all sorts of terrible things that just, it's a nonstop barrage. And I feel really bad that kids have to go through that stuff. Whenever I hear of a parent saying, oh, my kid's not even doing social media, I think, well, they probably are. But I'm glad that they're not doing it as much, at least not home and things. But again, don't have kids, so I don't know. What do I know?
Well, what comes up for me when you were saying that too is that like life is hard, Life can be not all the time, but life can be really difficult for adults and kids too. Like there are bullies in school and there are bullies online. There are bullies at work, there are bullies
Yeah,
in a lot of places. And that's part of the value of art. It's like a way to cope with the difficulty of being human.
yeah, it's good escape. Tale as old as time. I mean, artists have been creating escape forever. Go stare at a Van Gogh and you'll see that dude's working some stuff out.
Yeah. Oh yeah, he
Yeah.
definitely was. I
Yeah.
love his stuff. Um, Another thing I wanted to ask you too, because you have been in so many artistic endeavors and forms of expression, do they ever intertwine or intersect for you, or does one ever inform another? Or like, what comes up for you when you think about sort of the intersection of or application or inspirations from one art form to another?
Sure. It all intersects, every single part of it, because it's all storytelling to me. Whether it's I'm telling my story or someone else's, and you can tell a story with light, darkness, color, sound, word, a slab of paint, smushing together of words, lyrics, I mean, and exploration into one's own mind, staring at the clouds. It's all informing itself. Everything feeds into itself. I also love learning about neuroscience. I think it's phenomenal. You start going down that rabbit hole, and man, you'll never be the same, you
Yeah.
know? But yeah, it all informs each other for sure. I picked them all up at different times but of my life, but they all definitely feed into each other. When I was on set directing for the first time, I stood there and I thought, yeah, this is truly all of my skills wrapped into one.
Hmm.
And to that end, in my movie, I wrote it, I directed it, I wrote the song with my friend Jason Miller for it. I painted a painting that's in it, so that was fun.
That is super fun. My
Yeah.
goodness. Um, what was your film about, by the way? Can you tell us a little bit about it? Where people can
It's
learn more?
you won't be able to watch it in a theater for a year because it's doing the festival circuit. So, yeah. It is set in 1928. It is the story of a young boy named Michael who was brought by his father to experience a patrilineal family tradition. He's brought to what appears to be a brothel, and Michael's freaked out and terrified, and it feels very lamb to the slaughter. And what happens next, I use horror film elements to play with the idea of prey and predator and sexual politics and gender politics and the terror of vulnerability and the violence of sex and all of this stuff rolled into one. So that's basically what's
Wow,
in it.
that sounds
Yeah.
really interesting. Um, One of the other things, just switching gears a little bit, is have you been into improv?
Yeah, I did the Second City Conservatory program when I moved to California.
Yeah. So, okay, I did a class at the DC Improv too. And yes, and like some of the fundamentals of improv really made me realize that, well, life is improv.
Yes.
Yeah.
And yeah, it
And
really is. Yeah, I mean, we do. That's the funny thing. People are like, "Oh, you do improv? That's crazy." I'm like, "You're doing improv right now. You didn't know what you were about to say and you said it. That's improv. We're all improving all the time."
yeah. What did improv teach you anything else besides that like life is improv?
Football is life. That makes me think of Ted Lasso. Improv is life. Yes, I love the high wire aspect of improv and how your brain has to really just boom, boom, boom. You have to think so quickly on your feet. And I love the idea that listening is such a deep skill in improv. Um, it taught me, what did it teach me? To be okay with, my friend Rich Baker says, dare to fail. I love that. The idea that it's okay. There's no real mess up, even when you mess up. I mean, I don't know about you, but I've gone to improv where it's just a nosedive and it's almost more delightful in the nosedive than if everybody does everything and it all has cohesiveness. The nosedive is part of the fun.
Let's play.
Yeah, it's play. And so I think that that may be in a combination with, again, my friend Kathy, who said, what other people think of you doesn't matter. It's which is such a blow to your ego, right? It's a blow to the ego to think, what do you mean I don't matter? Well, you matter, but what other people think of how you matter doesn't matter.
Mm.
Because you can't do anything about it. I can't change whatever you think about me, that's yours. You might get to know me and it might change, but even I can't. You could get to know me and not change. I had somebody once tell me that they didn't like me because I smiled too much. I mean, how do you work with that?
What a weirdo.
Right? That's their own pain.
Yeah, that's their own pain. Yeah. But I agree, like we can't live our lives to please others because then we become
It's
slaves.
exhausting.
Yeah, it's exhausting. It's inauthentic. It's impossible, to please everybody all the time.
Hmm.
Um, Real quick back to improv. One of the things I loved about improv as an exercise, as a play, is that you become other characters, you become other roles. You
Hmm.
see what things feel like, even though they're not the real you. So there's
Hmm.
this sort of experimentation with different hats, different personas, different ways of being.
Mm.
In the lives of people who choose to live in a polymathic way, life is sometimes like that. Like, oh, I'm going to try on what it's like to be a criminal justice advocate. That wasn't part of my life plan. Uh, didn't predict it, but now here I am doing it. And so there's this comfort level. The older I get, I sort of get this comfort level with like evolving my personhood, trying new things, letting
Mm-hmm.
myself change. And what I've noticed, I'm wondering if you've experienced this as well, is the more I let myself change, I feel like I'm becoming a better version of myself.
Yeah. Well, you're giving yourself grace, right?
Yeah.
Grace is everything. But I mean, we wear different hats through our whole lives. I have a different relationship with my parents than I have with my brothers. I have a different relationship with you than I have with like my best friend in Tennessee, who I adore, but we don't agree on everything. So we talk about whatever we talk about, and maybe I talk about different things over here, and I wear a different hat with the lady down the street that's got 6 dogs. So we're constantly becoming, folding and unfolding. That's just that's the nature of being human.
Yeah. Can we just talk about being human real quick and then we can begin up.
Sure.
But I love that your podcast is called Hey Human.
Yeah.
That you've done like 400 episodes over 10 years, just getting to know a broad swath of humanity.
Yeah, it's 7 years, 2016. My
Okay,
400th
sorry.
episode. No, it's fine. It seems like 10 years. My 400th episode is next week, which is wild to me. And yeah, been doing it a long time. Yeah, I love it. I love it, and I also it's hard because it's requires a lot of time.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, my most favorite part is the conversation. My least favorite part is the editing.
No, I'm so bad. I almost never like I don't edit. I don't know how to edit.
Yeah,
I
that's
just kind of
good.
I just do the fun part and I just put it out there. And I probably need to professionalize like my efforts here on Polymath Place, but um
You don't have to do anything. You're perfect the way you are.
no,
That's
so
just the
sweet.
way I do it. It's just different. Different's okay.
Yeah. Well, you've met so many humans and
Mm.
interviewed them, gotten to know so many stories. And I love that you don't focus on a certain type of person or a certain issue. Like you really have a broad exploration of the human experience, and you've done it with so many people for many years. And so I'm like, as we begin to wrap up, I'm just curious, like, what have you learned about humanity? What are the commonalities you find? What and yeah, let's start with that.
I think the bottom line is that a lot of people hear, but they don't listen.
Mm,
That's a big one. And I think when you give people space and you listen, that they open up like a flower. Even the most grisly person, you know? Um, I know that we are here to remember, personally, I think we're here to remember who we are and to learn how to love ourselves. And what I've found is that love takes on a whole lot of different meanings depending on who you're talking with. I interviewed a Grand Dragon of the KKK, and for him, love is hate. So he gets people inspired by and getting them to feel love by hating someone else. Or he seeks out people who have a lot of self loathing or who feel disenfranchised. It was a really fascinating conversation, but that's still love. It's a weird way to look at it, but it's like people who are in abusive relationships because that's maybe how they were raised, and so they recognize that feeling as love even if it's hurting them. And the converse of that, of course, is that the love is also very loving and wonderful. And so that all those things exist all at the same time.
mm,
That people are so complicated and that they are entitled to have their life even if you don't agree with it. That's a really weird one to try and get your mind around because there are some really awful people in the world who do terrible things. But I can't control that, you know? I can ask them why, they've done those things. They may not even know.
I
And
love
I can maybe
awareness though.
point them in a direction to maybe see how that might be hurting themselves and others. Not by yelling at them or anything like that, but sort of again giving them space to sort of work it out. I feel like people come to the promised land of their own volition if only they were given the room to do so,
Mm.
if that makes sense.
Yeah. I think, I love to learn about things that seem forbidden. Like I love that you interviewed a member of the Ku Klux Klan. I would
Yeah.
never support them. I
Me
don't agree
neither.
with them, but I think it's important to hear them because if we want a culture that's less racist, it helps to understand the people who are
Well,
racist.
I often say you have to look in the shadows because actually they're not even in the shadows. I think we have this idea, and I've said this a bazillion times, that we put horns on people and we call them monsters. The truth is monsters don't have horns. They look like you and me. They're just out there in the world. They're your teachers and your neighbors and your pastors and your sheriffs and your school, whatever it is, your babysitters, your uncle, your aunt. They are just human beings, and some do very bad things, but they look just like us. And the more we go, oh, the monster's in the closet under the bed, the less likely we are to ever root out that evil, you
Yeah,
know?
and I think in a lot of cases, when you find someone who's, quote, a monster or who's sociopathic or psychopathic or doesn't have a conscience when they harm others, I think
Right.
what you probably will find is underneath that is a lot of trauma they experienced.
Oh, yeah, yeah, for
Yeah.
sure. And then you have to work on your empathy bone because, look, hurting a child, hurting an animal, no bueno.
Right.
That doesn't mean I can't understand why they're doing it.
Yeah. And when you understand why those bad actions happen, then you can begin to wonder, well, what can we do to prevent these sort of um,
Yeah.
situations so other people don't grow up or experience those traumas, which lead to such antisocial behavior? You got to do some root cause analysis, ask why, understand, listen to people, especially the people you don't agree with. I think
Yeah.
that's almost more important than talking with people who think similarly. It's so important to hear from everybody so that we can have a holistic perspective. Polymathy is very much related to holistic systems thinking. When you have a
Mm.
lot of tools in your toolkit, you can solve problems more creatively, more innovatively. And part of how you get a holistic perspective is exactly from listening to people who you don't agree with. Abraham
Well,
Lincoln
yeah.
had a team of rivals for that reason.
Yeah, and I think, yeah, I love that. I think that we are so desperate to not acknowledge the monster that lives in us and the shadow that lives in us. Again, we stick them in the closet and under the beds and put horns on them and all that stuff. But I have to, every interview I do, I have to see myself in that person. So if I'm interviewing someone who's incarcerated for murder, I look at the murderer that lives within me, right? To interview the Grand Dragon of the KKK, I have to see the racist that lives within me. In order to talk to the neuroscientist, I see the neuroscientist that lives within me. When I talk to the youngest person I've talked to, I think was 15. So when I did that interview, I have to acknowledge the little girl that lives in me, and welcome her to the conversation. We're so scared to touch those varying aspects of ourselves. And I would challenge anyone who says, I don't have a murderer lives in me. Oh, really? Have you ever been in your car and been so pissed at the person that drives away? Like, I'm going to kill you, or think about driving off into them, or, all those things. Those are all shadow.
Yeah, I
We've
think
all done it. We all have those thoughts. It's the difference is don't act them out, obviously,
exactly.
but
Yeah, I've had times in my past where I wish someone dead. I wouldn't do it, but I wouldn't have minded if it happened.
right. Because
Or
you're normal and you're a human being, and we've all had those thoughts. And to deny those thoughts is to deny the great aspects that live within us.
yeah. And I think it's so important to be honest and acknowledge the kinds of thoughts we're having, and then analyze, is that a thought I want to latch onto? Is that a thought I want to believe? Because just because we have a thought doesn't mean we should act on it. Just because we have a
Mhm.
thought doesn't even mean it's accurate or true or beneficial. So it's really, we may have lots of things that come in our minds that we can analyze and go, nope, like even though I might want that person to be harmed, I'm gonna let that go and be neutral and not put bad karma on myself or bad energy that I have to,
Sure.
survive.
Ethics and morals kicks in, and you
Yeah.
know, it's just like I've been so depressed. I've thought, oh, I could just drive over this cliff, no problem. Do I do it? No, because I can see past that at the repercussions of that. Have I been that blue? Yeah. I mean, it's funny. I was just at the doctor for an appointment, and for my OBG yearly appointment, and they give you that little piece of paper that says, where on a scale of 1 to 5, how are you feeling? And 1 means you're totally fine, no depression whatsoever. 5 is suicidal, basically, I guess. And I laughed as I'm circling. I think I circled 2, and I handed it back to her. I said, "Does anybody ever circle 1? I feel like if you're circling 1, you're just not even paying attention like
I
to
know.
anything in the world. My God, there's kids starving in Palestine and being bombed in fucking oblivion. Oh, I don't know if I can swear. And and there is sadness and depth and depression, like everywhere you turn. It's terrible. Everywhere you turn there's joy and wonderful and beauty too, but it's like, God, how could the blinders, that must be a great place to live. And even the deeply Buddhist Zen master acknowledges the suffering in the world, you know
Yeah. The
that was
blood.
a tangent again. I get on tangents.
Oh, I love it. Me too. That's what polymaths do. We just go on tangents, down rabbit holes. The blinders are easier. I can see why so many people do it. But to
Yeah.
me, uh, not being in touch with reality, that's what it means to be insane to me. Like to be sane means you're willing to look at the truth, even the hard crap.
Mm-hmm.
You're willing to accept reality as it is. And if you don't do that, then you're living in a kind of delusional world you've chosen. Not you,
Yeah.
but like
The royal you. Yeah.
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 So
And I get it. I see why it must be nice to live there, but I don't think it I don't think it serves us overall. Realizing this is a very blue light. I don't know why I picked this. I feel like I'm at a rave.
yeah, I think my light's kind of orange, pinky.
Yeah, it's nice. Yeah.
Um, but yeah, well, it's been so great to talk with you, Susan. I think you have such emotional intelligence and
Thanks.
bravery and vulnerability, authenticity that I really respect. And I love that it comes out in all your different art forms and contributions. I love
Thank you.
that you're curious not only about yourself, but about other people, even those you don't agree with, and that you've zigged and zagged your way to a life that feels like your version of success.
Yeah. Thank you. And thanks for having me on the show. I appreciate it. I'm excited that you're going to be on my show.
Woo! All right. Well, thanks for watching, everybody. And that's all for today.
Bye.
Bye.